Hello. So this is now lecture 3 of lesson 28, concluding the discussion about various social and religious dynamics under the rule of Augustus, and returning to the Virgil's Aeneid, which you again have on PDF, although I'm excerpting below the most important sections. So the first section I wanted to look at here today, you might recall from the last class, is that, of course, it tells the story of Aeneas, his journey from Troy to Italy. But one of the most important stops on this trip is in Carthage. And this is how the story actually begins, because after Aeneas lands on the shores of North Africa, because he has had an endless number of very difficult sea voyages, even just to get there, he will arrive at the site of Carthage, where Queen Dido rules, and who will ask him to narrate his life. And that's how we sort of get the backstory on what happened before. Now, the love story that develops between Dido and Aeneas is very interesting, because ultimately it will explain something very powerful about the deep antagonism of Rome and Carthage that was maintained as a Roman fantasy in this period, long time after Carthage itself was gone. You recall the Punic Wars, and at the end of the Third Punic War in 146 BCE, Carthage was destroyed. And although it actually will be rebuilt in the period of the Roman Empire, it's an excellent geographic location, and it will still be called Carthage. Nevertheless, it is not the archenemy anymore, right? It will be a Roman city. But this story that we get here is about Queen Dido, who is a Phoenician refugee, essentially, who arrives to Carthage, where she is building her city. And she is a protege of Juno, and that's the sort of conflict that drives this section of the Aeneid. And again, this is also part of the story. We are still in the part where we are talking about the journey that the man has to take, the Odyssean part. And so this is about Aeneas' own experience during his long journey to reach Italy from Troy. Okay, so we are in book 4, and the big question that we are going to face is sort of what's happening. There's a sort of love story happening and how it goes. And so by the beginning of book 4, Dido has already fallen in love with Aeneas, and this is how it opens here. But the queen, long since wounded with the grievous pain of love, feeds the wound with her lifeblood and is consumed by a fire deep within her. I think just that much already shows us the depth of passion, right, that we are talking about. And this passion is not necessarily one that makes you happy. This is not you walking off into the sunset, holding the hand of your loved one. Instead, it's something that's painful. That's a wound. It's a fire, right? And she is thinking about Aeneas. Many a thought of the courage of the man goes racing around in her mind. Many a thought of his noble lineage. His features and his verse stick fast in her heart, and the pain of her love allows her limbs no soothing rest, right? And sort of the million-dollar question that develops from this is to wonder about how Aeneas feels. And Virgil does give us some details about it, but also will be very clear that that was not the job Aeneas was supposed to do based on his larger mission to go reach Italy. And I think one part of this story is also a fantasy about a woman who is different. And I give you here a coin of Dido that's actually a Phoenician coin, not contemporaneous at all to any historical Dido that might have ever existed. But nevertheless, even though the facial portrayal may seem sort of like she looks like anybody else, the headwear is already unusual. And on the other side of the coin, we see a lion. So if Romans thought about Dido, they also would have fantasized about someone who would be sort of exotic and different. And so actually, in many ways, Dido is standing in for Cleopatra, who was sort of the fantastic Oriental woman in the Roman mind. At any rate, at a certain point, Venus and Juno agree that they will allow the two of them to have a bit of an affair. And they go on a hunt, Dido, Aeneas, and both Carthaginians and Trojans. And at a certain point, there is a huge storm. And this is what we get. This is now book 4, line 165 and following. Dido and the Trojan leader came to the same cave. Primeval Earth and Juno, goddess of marriage, gave the sign. Fires blazed and the sky was witness to the marriage, and the nymphs cried out on the mountain top. That day was the first that led to death, the first that led to disaster. Dido was no longer moved by thoughts of how things looked or what people said. She no longer kept her love a furtive secret in her heart. She called it marriage, and under that name, she cloaked her guilt. And I think, of course, part of what is really beautiful here that I would be hard pressed to imagine such a beautifully elegant depiction of the two of them having a passionate sexual affair. But I think it also sort of is in tension with what we have been talking about in terms of Augustan love poetry, is that there is marriage, there is proper sexual relations that you're supposed to have. But what they have, she calls it marriage. He doesn't, or at least we don't know what he calls it. And so there is this sort of tension between the passions you might feel versus sort of what traditional morality prescribes about what you're supposed to do and maybe also feel. Some of the hints that Aeneas might have some feelings for her are evolving in book 4. And part of what the way it is shown is that Aeneas starts to think less about moving on, getting ready to build up his boats and move towards Italy. And so we get Mercury, who is a sort of messenger god to being sent to Aeneas and remind him that he has a job to do. Okay, so here we are in lines 265. You there? Are you laying the foundations of lofty Carthage now and building a fine city to gratify your wife? Alas, have you forgotten your kingdom and your destiny? The ruler of the gods himself, whose divine power makes the heavens and the earth revolve, sends me down to you from bright Olympus. It is he who instructs me to bring these comments through the swift breezes. What are you planning? What do you hope to gain by wasting time on Libyan soil? If you are left unmoved by the glory of such a great destiny, have some regard for your growing son Ascanius and the hopes that Iulus has as your heir. The kingdom of Italy and the Roman land are his by right? And so essentially, Aeneas gets a very powerful message from the gods that his job is not to fall in love and settle, but his job, he has a destiny, and that destiny is to reach Italy so the future Rome can be founded. And so he feels that he has to go, and she, being a smart woman, figures out at some point that something is up. And so she gets pretty upset and starts to yell at him. And after that, Aeneas responds, and that gives us a sense of sort of where he is at. And he says, I shall never deny, O queen, that you have earned my gratitude for all the countless services that you can list in words. And I shall never forget the memory of Alyssa as long as I have memory of myself and breath rules these limbs, right? The point is, this is both incredibly cold, but at the same time says, this was very meaningful to me. But at the same time, I thank you for all the things, the services that you've given to me, is sort of suggestive that things are over. And so he kind of explains that where he is coming from, and he talks about how the Trojans have the right to look for their own kingdom. So there's that larger business. He talks about the ghost of his father who appears in his sleep, and So maybe we can pick up in 353. The thought comes to me of the boy Ascanius, to the son, and the wrong I'm doing to someone I love in cheating him of the kingdom of Hesperia and the lands that are his by fate. Now, even the messenger of the gods sent by Jupiter himself, I swear it by your life and by mine, has brought down his commands through the swift breezes. Yes, with my own eyes and in the clear light of the day, I saw him entering the walls. With my own ears, I drank in his words. Stop inflaming both of us with your complaints. I make for Italy, but not of my own free will. And so this gives us a sense of an incredible choice that Aeneas has to make between loving someone and potentially wanting to be with her. You know, there is a city, it's sort of semi-settled now. You know, he could just stay, but he has this destiny that's bigger than his love for this woman. And so he has to leave. Of course, Dido does not take this very well, and book 4 sort of evolves into Aeneas getting ready to depart and Dido getting ready to kill herself. And before she kills herself, essentially, she forecasts the coming conflict between Carthage and Rome, inscribing that as also fated for the Romans to have to fight Carthage very powerfully in that. I think what sort of Virgil nevertheless clearly gives us here is whether our life is all about passions and loves, or are there some things we have to do sort of from a way bigger perspective, as a question, you know, that we in some ways all have to engage in our lives. So as book 4 ends, Aeneas is off and Dido is dead. And on the journey further to Italy, there is one more undertaking for Aeneas, and then he has to go to the underworld. This is very much, again, on a Greek example. Most Greek heroes on journeys have to undertake such a visit to the underworld. And so in book 6, we are visiting the underworld, where obviously the dead are, and his father sort of guides him through it and talks about various a river of forgetting, where quite a few of these ghosts are. So this is how he describes it. We are in book 6, lines 7, 12 and following. They are the spirits to whom a second body is owed by fate, by the waters of the river Lethe. They are drinking the draught that takes away their cares and gives them long forgetfulness. Indeed, I have long desired to tell you who they are and to show them to you face to face, and to count this line of my descendants, so that you may rejoice with me all the more now that you have found Italy, right? So the idea here is that you have come to Italy, and I'm going to show you the sort of the descendants, the future individuals who will be leaders in Italy. And Aeneas, in fact, says, like, oh, wow, are we really to think that some spirits go up to the light of heaven from here and return to clogging bodies? Why do the wretched spirits have such a terrible longing for the light? But it turns out that this is actually a good thing, that this is something only the best people get after they die, the chance to return. And among those who are shown down in the underworld to Aeneas, we get this description in line 793 and following. This is the man, this is the one whom you so often hear promised to you, Augustus Caesar, the son of a god, who will establish a second golden age in Latium across the fields once reigned over by Saturn, and will carry the bounds of his empire beyond the Garamantes and the Indians. So essentially, Virgil inscribes Augustus into this vision of the future leaders of Italy and Rome. And Anchises, the father of Aeneas, goes even goes further, because he describes not just the future leaders, but also the mission that Rome is on. And he says in lines 851 and following, what is the job of the Romans? You, O Roman, never forget to rule the peoples of the world under your command. These will be your arts, and to add civilization to peace, to spare those who submit and fight the proud into submission. So what's really interesting about this section here is that he talks about some other peoples who are really good in other things, but what is unique and special about the Romans, according to this, is that he suggests that they are the rulers of the world and achieve that by military might in case anybody messes with them. So as they sort of go around the rest of the underworld, after Anchises has given this message to Aeneas, we get the following conclusion to the book, and this is where we are going to end for today with these final lines here of 893 and following. Because there's something very interesting happening here that's very suggestive of Virgil's art and artistry and how amazingly he is able to problematize some of these promises. I think that if this wasn't the end of this book, I might feel a little bit more disturbed about this text. I might feel that this is a very propagandistic text. Okay, yeah, Romans, you're supposed to rule, and Augustus, you're supposed to come and be the next golden age. Fantastic. You know, that's a little bit not very subtle. But this is the end, right? So here we are. There are two gates of sleep, one of which is said to be made of horn, and through it an easy exit is granted to true shades. The other is made of gleaming ivory, but the world below sends false dreams to the heavens. So we're talking about sleep, and there is an easy one that is made of horn, and that's true. And the other one is ivory, which is much fancier than horn, but it is the false dreams, right? So as he spoke in this way to his son and the Sibyl too, Anchises escorted them there and sent them out by the ivory gates. So Aeneas gets sent out through the ivory gate, and then Aeneas goes and to the ships and joins his comrades, and they sail off. But he went through the ivory gate. Let us just go back. So it's made of gleaming ivory, but the world below sends false dreams to the heavens. So is this fantasy, is this greatness that Anchises suggests in the underworld, that Augustus will bring about another golden age and that the Romans will rule the world? Is that a sure given thing, or is it more of a question? We might wonder why Virgil has some doubts, and that is something we are going to discuss in the next lesson. Thank you.